in the automotive industry, there are two types of cars: successes and failures. But how do you judge a failure? What is the criteria? Was it its performance, its pop culture legacy, its impact on the industry, or its sales? Well, the car we're discussing today achieved 3 out of those 4 things, but many still call it a failure because it just didn't sell all that well. This very important but very unsuccessful car is the Porsche 928. In my humble opinion, the Porsche 911 is the greatest sports car ever made. It balances heritage and technology better than any other car on the road, and it just keeps getting faster and more advanced with each variation. Which makes the comments from Porsche's 1970 managing director all the more strange. Ernst Furman said that the 911 was reaching maximum capacity for its flat-six rear-engine layout and wanted to replace it with something that could easily be slid into the US market. Yeah, he was going to replace the iconic 911 as far back as 1970 because it couldn't be improved upon. Talk about short-sighted. And they were going to replace it with a GT car of all things. Granted, it was a Porsche Grand Touring car, so it wasn't going to be a slouch. But can you just imagine an era where the 911 is canned in favor of a Grand Touring car? Yeah, that's weird. Now, they considered sticking 2 Audi inline 5s together to make a V10, but quickly scratched that idea and went for a more practical 4.5-liter V8, making 240 horsepower. Now, Porsche also considered making the 928 mid-engine, but they found it was too restrictive inside the cockpit and settled with a front-mounted engine powering the rear wheels. It was behind the rear axle, though, and combined with the transaxle meant it had 50-50 weight distribution. Now, there was one issue with this design. Porsche had never done anything like it before, so they bought a Mercedes SL to reverse engineer and test the parts on. And the body was like no Porsche either up to that point. It was incredibly smooth with flush bumpers and pop-up headlights. In fact, the body was so round and smooth that a myth spread that the teardrop shape was more aerodynamic backwards than forwards. It wasn't, but it did lead to Mythbusters cutting up an actual 928 and running it with the body on the other way around to test the drag coefficient. Again, Mythbusters, amazing show, but they cut up a Porsche 928. God damn. But there was one other thing that made this particular Porsche even more unique. It was heavy. Not by today's standards, 3,200 pounds is actually quite light. But back then, when there weren't safety regulations or anything like that, it was a very heavy car. But it had a lot of technology to handle that weight and make it handle even better than the 911 at the time. Not only did it have that 50-50 weight distribution because of the transaxle, it also had the Weissach axle, which was a bit of clever engineering that caused the wheels to toe into the body under braking instead of, towing out like a 911 did. Now, toe in leads to less lift-off oversteer, correcting that infamous Widowmaker situation for the 911. And then there were some more peculiar things for the 928, like the sun visors on the rear window, since it's technically a 2+2, and they wanted to have rear visors for the massive windscreen on the back for the people, because they're actually designed to sit in the back of these cars. Sometimes, I know they've forgotten about that now, but back then you did actually have enough room for a European adult in the back of these things. And another little bit of trivia is that the entire instrument cluster moved with the steering wheel when you adjusted it, because that maintained perfect visibility of the dials, which is something I really like, and I don't know why people don't do it anymore. I mean, probably cost, but still, it's nice. Which meant that after 6 years of development, the 928 debuted at the 1977 Geneva Motor Show to immense acclaim. It won the 1978 European Car of the Year, the only time a sports car has ever won the award. And Porsche, being Porsche, just kept making it better. Because this car was still choked by emissions, which is why it only made 240 horsepower. But the 928 came out a few years later with a 4.7-liter V8, new fuel injectors, bigger brakes, and front and rear wings. The 928S was a 50 horsepower increase over the normal model while making it handle even better. We didn't get it until 1983, and even then it had a government-restricted 234 horsepower limit, but it made it the fastest production car on sale in the US with a 146 mile-an-hour top speed. And again, because it's Porsche, they made the 928 S2, which got an even bigger 5-liter V8 with 2 valves per cylinder, making over 300 horsepower. And the S2 also led the charge on installing ABS systems in all 928s by 1986. Now here's a little Jeopardy game for you. If the S2 had 2 valves per cylinder, how many valves did the S4 have? If you said 4, congratulations, you're correct. And it made even more horsepower. To be honest, I can list all of the millions of little improvements that Porsche did to the 928 over all of these years. It's a very long laundry list of modifications and improvements. There's a lot of different variants. I've already listed, 4 here in the first bit. We had the 928, the 928S, the 928S2, then the 928S4, and they still kept going. But all this brilliant work culminated in the 1995 928 GTS. Now up to 5.4 liters, the naturally aspirated V8 made 345 horsepower and 370 torque. That's 100 more than the 1978 model, which meant the GTS needed some beefing up. Bigger brakes with cooling ducts for them, bigger tires with wider rear fenders to fit said wider tires. It was a proper super GT car, 0 to 60 in 5 seconds and reaching a top speed of over 170 miles an hour. All while being more composed around the corners than the 911 with a fantastic interior to boot. The 928 proved to be a great car, with just one tiny problem. The base price was $28,000 in 1978, with the GTS eclipsing $100,000. That's $200,000 today, and people just couldn't afford it. So in the span of 18 years, only 61,000 were sold, which is, even by Porsche standards, a pitiful amount. The 928 and a general sales slump nearly bankrupted Porsche, but it did have some long-term benefits. First, they made a few long-wheelbase 4-seater prototype versions of the 928, and while they didn't go anywhere then, they do look suspiciously similar to the Panamera that would release in 2009. Second, in order to see why sales were so poor, Porsche did studies to see who was buying their cars. And what they found is that most Porsche buyers already owned an SUV, a realization that led to them pursuing their own SUV dreams, the Cayenne, which is now their best-selling model ever, and single-handedly funds almost every awesome Porsche project from the Carrera GT to the GT3 RS. And third, and most importantly, Peter Schultz kicked Ernest Furman to the curb and produced the 928 and the 911 simultaneously. They didn't replace it. Spoiler alerts. And this, along with the 914, 924, 944, greatly expanded Porsche's market range. Nowadays, Porsche has a variety of sedans, SUVs, and various levels of sports car to ensure market diversification. So yes, by the literal definition, it was a failure. But it's also true to say that the 928 walked so that Porsche could run.